Abuse trauma recovery as an online course was specifically designed so that if you didn't want to talk to anybody about what you went through, you didn't have to. You could figure out a lot of the recovery process from just sitting in front of your computer, in front of your self-reflections, in front of your knowledge gain, in connection to the meditations, in connection to the readings, in connection to listening to all the audios and videos added, and just have this kind of therapeutic process available to yourself that would respond to you in all sorts of different ways, all different types of tools that would speak to your brain and your heart and your body, and also be able to help you work through things so that you could feel your own recovery capacity. Because so many people get very shamed around the abuse they suffered, very embarrassed, they feel like they just don't want to tell anybody. But you are so worth recovering that whether you tell someone or not, this course, all these courses were set up specifically so if you didn't want to tell anybody, you don't have to. You can move forward and still keep your truth, because I don't know who your people are in your life. I don't know how defensive they're going to be if they find out. I don't know what the impact's going to be on your family or friends or community. I don't know what jeopardy you might put yourself in by telling anybody. I don't know. I do know that it's very important for you to help yourself recover and then to focus on your capacity to thrive. And so this process, this online class, is about being able to give you all of these different tools, feeling relatively connected to me, relatively connected to a community of people who are right there with you, relatively connected socially through the social Facebook group that we have, relatively connected to the ongoing blogs that are posted for you. And yet I want you to realize that even though this is relatively connected and definitely a very personal experience for you, that there is something about meeting people who really get you, understand you, respect you, don't belittle you, don't say, oh, that can't be, or can't even be present with you, but instead can be present with you. Understand the bigness and the gravity of this. Understand how huge this is. Even admire you for getting through it, admiring you in a positive way, in a healthy way, in a way that makes you feel your own strength, your capacity to have your own admiration, so you feel the respect that really is warranted because you've survived, you've escaped, and now you're working your own recovery. There is something about having that person there, and that's why in the previous classes, especially in course number 10, I talk about developing a therapeutic relationship. So in this last class on course number 11, which is all about self-therapy, I don't want you to use self-therapy as a way of avoiding connecting to someone or maybe a group of someone's that are healthy to connect with. And you're going to need to develop awareness of who's going to be healthy that I can connect to that would also get this. Because, by the way, if they've gone through this and they've got parts of them that have abuse and trauma in their history, how do I know that they're healthy? How do I know that they've been able to thrive and move on? How will I recognize individuals who will treat me with respect? How will I know how people will react? And the truth is you don't always. And so what you do is you test them out a little bit at a time. You might test them out by saying, oh my gosh, did you hear about Bill Cosby and what he did to those women? And you get to find out how they react, what they think, what their thought process is. It might give you a little bit of feel of whether or not they're open for understanding it. And they may even say, well, I went through it. I completely know what those women went through. Or how about if you're a soldier and you got molested by one of the people in your cabin, your tent, your sleeping quarters, and you don't want to tell any other soldiers that you went through it because of the shame and embarrassment, but you just kind of like say, hey, did you hear about that case where that soldier talked about being molested? What do you think? And then you begin to have a little bit, maybe they're putting on the vibrato and the cover and, I don't know. And yet you say, well, I don't know. I'm thinking that there's something to it. And maybe they stop and go, oh, maybe you are a person of like-kindedness. But then you still have to go farther, right? You have to go farther, not only that they might be able to think in like kindness with you, but that they're actually trustworthy to know a bit about you. And then maybe more and more and more progressively, without one gossiping, without sharing it with anybody else, without it triggering them, because you don't want to be triggering another person because they won't respond well to you. And also without their stories triggering you. So you take these relationships bit by bit by bit by bit. Just put little feelers out there. Think of it more not like you're trying to put out the bait on the one hook that gets the big fish and then you're done fishing for the day. But maybe you're just wanting to catch little fish, little sardines. I know this isn't the way you catch sardines because you put them in nets and all that sort of stuff, but just pretend for a moment that you put a little worm on the edge of a hook and you get out there and you catch a little sardine. Just enjoy that sardine and save it for lunch, and then put another one out there and catch another sardine. And that's the way relationships are, one sardine at a time. Boy, what a metaphor, right? So you're not just laying it all out there and putting it all out there and then taking a risk. One, this person gets triggered. Two, this person violates you by gossiping. Three, this person rejects you because they're overwhelmed, or rejects you because they don't believe you. You just don't need to put yourself out there for harm's way, for people who could be cruel or unkind to you because of their own inadequacies, their own insecurities, their own issues, their own naivety. Or maybe you're talking to someone who's also been an abuser. One thing that I've noticed in this whole situation with Bill Cosby and Dr. Ford, which maybe by the time you're listening to this, maybe years ago, this is in 2018, is some people actually have memories of being sexually assaultive. And so when you put that little fish hook out there and you get the sardine of their response, they have a very different reaction because they're a little worried about something being revealed about themselves. Or maybe they regret that they did it and they wish they could figure out a way to heal it, but how do you do that, But nonetheless, you have to realize you could be talking to someone who's perpetuated someone else's pain, right? Just because someone has caused another person pain doesn't mean they're horrible for the rest of their life necessarily. But when you're sharing and trying to develop a connection, rapport with someone, where you have this self-therapeutic relationship and the connection with other people, you don't just dump on other people. It's too risky for you and for them. Just a little bit at a time. In addition, you don't make all of your relationships, nor all of that one relationship, all about the abuse and trauma. It can be peppered in there. And then allow the rest of the relationship to be thriving as well. And that's a really good practice for you, because that's the way you want to relate to yourself. You want to get to the point where you're not all about your abuse and trauma. Of course it's huge. Of course it's really huge. Of course, so much of you has at one point been completely dominated and organized around your abuse and trauma and the effort to recover, escape, survive, tolerate it. But now you want also to be so much of who you are to be organized around thriving, which means that yes, abuse and trauma is there, but it isn't everything. So in the same way, these therapeutic relationships can have these moments where you move into that space of sharing and doing that kind of friendly, mutual, therapeutic empathy with each other in a very trusted and tested situation. But also know that there's all this other space that you can go to that isn't about abuse and trauma, that is just tremendously relieving and pleasant and thriving. This you that you are that's much bigger, much more than the abuse and trauma. And therefore this relationship, as therapeutic as it might be for the abuse and trauma, is so much more. This is really important when a spouse tells a spouse, you know what, I'm remembering that I was abused and traumatized. Whether I was abused and trauma in the military, or by a family member, or by a neighbor, but when I was really young, or when I was in college, or whenever. I remember when I was abused and traumatized, and I didn't remember until this moment, or I didn't want to tell you until this moment. And then there's a period of time where the relationship that's very loving is supportive of that. healing process, that recovery process, and it has to go through its own evolution of healing and recovering, as well as this relationship has some new discovery, has some new revelations in it, right? But one thing you really must pay very good attention to is that while this relationship is therapeutic in terms of recovering from abuse or trauma, don't let that be the thing that swallows up and drowns everything else that relationship can be. Because then it's really essentially drowned everything you can be that's outside of the abuse and trauma, and drowned the relationship so that it can't thrive way beyond this situation. It's like being real with yourself as you're recovering and taking good care of yourself. And in this particular class, in the context of therapeutic relationships, is not the same as being owned or letting the relationship be owned and still being enslaved by the abuse trauma situation. So be mindful of how much time does this relationship dedicate to that recovery? Can we evolve it to have so many other things going on? You bet, because you're evolving to having so much of your life be into the lane of thriving. Okay, I'll see you in class number 12. Oh, well, course number. Okay, I'll see you in course number 12, which is all about some really intriguing and off-the-wall different ways of looking at life and healing and recovery. And I think there'll be some of you that really think, wow, this is great. And others will go, oh my gosh, this is so bizarre. And that's why I leave it to the last, so that you're not like befuddled by the bizarreness of it, because it's just not everybody's cup of tea, right? Okay, talk to you later. Bye.